So let's get that conversation started with Charles, the former industrial editor of the Sun newspaper, and Steve Hedley, the former Assistant General Secretary at the RMT. First of all, how similar, Charles, do you think what we're seeing at the moment is to what you and I reported on throughout the 80s?
Slightly similar, because you read out a litany of industrial action that's on the cards or about to be on the cards. So, yes, there's quite a lot coming up. We had a winter of discontent in 1979, as you know, which led to the fall of the Callaghan government and the election of Margaret Thatcher. I don't think we've got a winter of discontent coming. I think we have a summer of discontent, and I don't think it will have anywhere near the impact that it had in the 70s and the 80s. I say that because union membership is half of what it used to be. 13 million back then, 6 million now, and that is if you believe some of the union figures on paper. And also, the workforce today is a lot bigger than the workforce of the 70s. Yeah. Most of the industries that were, powerful unions' involvement have gone. We're now into the public sector and white-collar workers. The strikes that are happening now, we've also got new technology, which means an awful lot of workers do not have to wait for a train to get to work. They can just sit at home with their laptops and whatever else. We learned an awful lot through COVID that we could cope, and I think we will cope.
Yeah. Does that, disagree with it if you will, but I'd go along with most of that analysis, and the only point I'd add to it is that in those days we were talking about smokestack industries like steel and coal. These are about transportation, about logistics, the ports and what have you. But is that analysis right, that the unions are not what they were in the 80s nowadays?
Well, look, there is some truth in it. That's undeniable. The union membership has declined massively since the 80s. But what we have here, we haven't got a conscious movement trying to overthrow a democratic government, as your introduction would have it. What we have is people who are forced into actually taking action because of the cost of living crisis. Bills have gone through the roof. We have the utilities and the energy companies in particular making extortionate profits. We have a system capitalism that has to expand every year in order to survive. And that's with a planet with finite resources. So we are in the midst of an environmental crisis. And what we need is not government change, but system change. And that's trade unions will play a part in that. I think also you're going to have unorganised workers playing a part in that. And I think
well, let me butt in on that, because I mentioned Enough is Enough, a new movement, and there are one or two of the papers, and you might say they would, wouldn't they? But they're likening it to the Momentum movement that supported Jeremy Corbyn and that harder leftist view. But the real power in this land can be exerted when organised labour and other groups come together.
Yeah, I think, to be fair, enough and enough is enough, and people like that are just trying to rehash sort of 1970s social democracy and repackage them and say this is a solution where it's obviously not. I think that we have to have workers' control in this country, a massive redistribution of wealth, and we have to have that worldwide in order to save not just the economy in this country, but in fact the planet.
When Steve was giving that analysis of it being a problem in his eyes and people who are like-minded to him in the trade union movement, that it's about the system, it's about capitalism, what have you. You and I heard Mick McGahey say that, sure. Arthur Scargill say that. There was a crisp political analysis as well.
Yes, there was. And I think I agree with Steve. There is problems that we've got in this country that need to be sorted. The government at the moment is rudderless. We do not have a head of the government. We don't have a prime minister, which is part of the problem, which it is allowing, various unions, take advantage is the wrong phrase, but to move their points forward, like the rail workers.
But is it take advantage? Is it purely coincidental and fortuitous, or would the likes of Mick Lynch, leadership of the RMT, have said, right, now's the time to go?
You've got 100... I don't think it's fortuitous. I think it's a complete coincidence. But the reality is you've got 160,000 people who are very much to the right of the general public in Britain, the average view, who are going to decide who the next Prime Minister is. So therefore you don't really have any level of honesty between Truss and Sunak. You've got them appealing to a very right-wing proportion of the electorate in order to get their position secured.
Yes.
So that's what's happening.
Charles?
Be fair, Steve. The same thing would happen if it was a Labour Party choosing a new leader. The unions would be involved in the voting for that leader, not not people who are not members of the Labour Party.
The current leadership of the Labour Party be probably appealing to the same constituency.
Well, that was a moment that I wasn't expecting, but it takes me to the next thing that I did want to put to you. And that is, a lot of people listening to this conversation, both of you kick off whichever one you want to, will have some sympathy with anyone who is struggling with the cost of living crisis, because they all are as well. But in terms of the politics of it, which you so succinctly spelt out, they say if they want to change the government, they'll do it at the general election. They'll do it when there's a vote. They don't want it forced upon them by either side. That's a real danger for the trade union movement.
Well, I honestly don't see the leadership of the trade union movement and their big salaries being prepared to take what actions necessary to bring down the government. I think that action would involve breaking the anti-trade union laws. And I think a lot of people, I don't see Francis O'Grady getting let off in cuffs for the cause. I really don't see that. I think it's going to be down to rank and file members of trade unions. They actually get out there, organise with community activists, organise a can't pay, won't pay campaign. With members of the general public who are not currently organised. If that's a way we're going to affect real change in this country, and if that brings the government down, so be it. We were supposed to have a democracy, not an elective dictatorship. Nobody voted in this government thinking they'd allow the fuel companies and the energy companies to have such extortionate profits. People will literally not be able to heat their houses in the winter. Working class people in the main, but also middle income people will be suffering from this. Nobody voted for that.
But that is everybody, not just union members. Everybody is facing the same problems. And, you know, the talks of general strike, I do not believe that union members or anyone else will support attempts for a general strike to try to bring down an elected government. I mean, there's already moves afoot of people being very, very upset that Boris Johnson was ousted by just a few MPs rather than facing the polls. And I'm not making a fan base for Boris Johnson or anything like that, but I'm just saying he was elected by the country. Yeah. He has been de-elected by just a handful of people. Yeah,
because let me go back, I'll come in on what he said, but let me add one other point to it, which I was hinting at in my introduction, and that is I do talk to a lot of people who do have sympathy, even with the rail workers, because they're trying to pay their bills as well, and the rail workers are saying, look, we're going to not work anymore unless we can get a decent cost of living rise. They sympathise with that. But if they can't get to see their favourite football match or take their kids out to Essex for a holiday weekend like this weekend, you can very easily lose that sympathy.
Look, public sympathy is a wonderful thing, but if it all depended on public sympathy, the nurses would be really well paid and the politicians would be on the minimum wage. It doesn't. It depends on industrial strength and the concrete situation that people find themselves in. And the reason we're getting, the railway workers are getting massive support is because everybody else is in the same boat. Every other working class person, and perhaps even middle class person is out there, is in the same boat. They see an inflation going through the roof. Wages are being suppressed. They've been suppressed for over a decade. In the last 3 years, because we had a 2-year pay freeze on the railways, and now we have inflation at 10.1%, we've seen real wages reduced by a fifth. People have lost 20% of their spending power. They're not going to continue to do that.
And most of the support you're getting is coming through new technology on Twitter, because as opposed to way back in the 70s, people would just turn up on a picket line to show their support or toot their horns. I'm sure they're still tooting their horns today. But if you look at Twitter and you talk about particularly the rail workers, there is a lot of support for the rail workers by members of the public who I'm assuming are not members of the RMT. So that is the way that they're doing it in the support.
Yeah, I mean, and I think there's a lot of misrepresentation still in the mainstream media. I mean, I picked up on your screen outside that the rail workers were offered 8%. They haven't been offered 8%. What they've been offered is a deal over 2 years that delivers 8%. Now, we don't know. We have no idea what inflation is going to be next year, but I doubt it's going to be 0%. You know, Bank of England forecasts are 13% by the end of this year. So that would mean, in effect, a real terms pay cut over 2 years. Who in their right mind would actually agree to a deal like that when inflation's out of control?
And
let me just add something, because I think that is intriguing, and Barry Gardiner made the same point on Arlene's programme just a moment ago when we were chatting about it. And I put to Barry, and he kind of smiled and took it on board, I think, that in the current system, of which you were very lucidly critical of earlier, the government or the rail companies might be tempted to say, OK, fine, I'll give you 13%, but there will only be 80% of you left compared to the 100% who we currently employ. That's a real dangerous trade-off in the current climate for you guys.
Well, I mean, they're not even offering that. They're not even offering to have an inflation-proof pay rise. But the reality is everything is being made conditional on thousands of job cuts, which people will say, well, OK, if that's not done compulsory, if that's done voluntarily, then that's OK. But it's not, because what it'll mean is that the people left behind, their work-life balance will be absolutely destroyed. These are people who already work shifts. Now, the proposals the companies are putting forward is 39 weeks of nights and 39 weekends. I mean, if you see your children at weekends, I mean, what does that leave? 10 weeks a year or 12 weeks a year you can actually see your kids? It's nonsense, and people won't accept it.
So you're right about what the rail companies have offered the RMT, but I would say to Mick Lynch and the negotiating team, get back round that table and work out what's going to be paid over the 2 years, and also let's get started to talk about what the companies want in terms of reorganisation or modernisation or whatever it is you want to call it.
But again, I'm going to grab that point and throw it back to both of you as well. So if I was Mick Lynch, I would think I've gone from virtually nothing to 2% to now 13%, albeit over 2 years, as Steve Wright.
8% over 2 years.
OK, but I'm still going to think, as the leadership of ASLEF or the RMT or any of those big industrial unions, we've got them on the run. A bit more strike action, we'll have a bit more on the table.
I'm not a big fan of Mick Lynch, right? But he hasn't walked away from the negotiating table. He's still there at the negotiating table. In fact, these talks have been taking place in various bodies, Rail Industry, Coronavirus Forum and various bodies for 3 years. I mean, no one just walks out and goes, right, that's it, 2 minutes notice, we're all on strike. There has been a process that people have followed. And they've only got to this situation because the government, actually, you have to have sympathy for the devil in the train operating companies and Network Rail, because the government are limiting their bargaining power. We've got the worst of all worlds. We nominally have a privatised system which is being actually bombarded and paid for by the taxpayer. Avanti, for example, have just paid out 11 million to their shareholders, and they've got 17 million off the government. The government may as well pay the shareholders. But the reality is these companies can't negotiate because the government are putting the limits on their negotiations. And then Lynch and the negotiating team are going into the negotiations, and the companies are going, well, you have to speak to the government because they put a limit on us. Then the government are going, not our problem, speak to the company.
Sure, but my point is that Grant Shapps' main contribution in the last 72 hours has been... Well, no, I was glad glad they took the wide shot at that point. It is to say, put what is on the table. You said get wrapped around the table. Yeah. The Transport Secretary says, put what is on the table now to the membership of the trade union and let them determine whether they think it's good, bad or indifferent, not just the leadership. That's democratic, isn't it?
Well, that's all right. Well, if that's what they're saying, then put what's on the table in the Tory party leadership to the country, call a general election. People are elected. It's a representative democracy to make representative decisions. So Mick Lynch and the leadership just don't go, well, we think that's a bad offer. They consult with the reps. The reps are elected by the members.
But isn't this the same problem at Felixstowe, where the strike has started today? Those 1,900 guys have been offered 8%. And they've said, no, they won't put it to their membership. But there's 500 clerical staff at the docks at Felixstowe have accepted the same deal.
Well, the reality is no trade union makes a decision without consulting its membership. Whatever they do, well, hold on. You know as well as I do, there's more than one form of consultation. It's not always a direct democracy, OK? There's a representative democracy. People elect a local rep. Local reps elect senior reps. And all those people are talked to get a flavour of what the membership feel in order to actually make a decision. Yeah. No one goes, all right, we don't like that. And they consult the representatives first. Now, if the representatives are out of tune, the members will soon let them know.
Yeah.
Because, you know, this idea that you've got these union leaders, or barons as they'd like to be called, no hereditary lordships in the trade union movement, by the way, we're all elected. So these people come along and the membership tell us when they want to go on strike and how long they want to go on strike for. It would be absolutely fantastic if people could give up and write 6 months all out, but you can't. The membership have to tell you what to do.
We've got about 2 minutes left, and I want to just add one final thought, and I'd love to hear what you both think about it. And apart from Charles and I standing reporting on picket lines endlessly during the 80s, we also stood endlessly outside a thing called ACAS, the Arbitration Conciliation Service. In your view, is there any hope at all of an outside party? You've made it very clear what you think of the government, and I respect that and I hear it, and of the ownership of the rail companies. But is there any role for an independent body to come in and say, look, we just got to get these goods moving through the country. We've got to get people using the trains back to work?
I think there's always room for any outside body to come in and have a fresh look. I don't see ACAS, which is a government-funded body, actually to be a particularly independent body. But the reality is this. I think we have to get away from the notion that you can't take action and negotiate at the same time. And that's what the employers put the gun to the heads of the trade unions and say, well, we're not going to negotiate with you when you're taking action. I think there's room for both. I think you can go in when the action's on and you can negotiate at the same time. And I think if that's on the table, I think people should take up that offer.
Final thought, Charles?
Well, I think you're right. I think there should be a body of some description. I understand what Steve's saying about ACAS being sort of government quango, so to speak. But surely there's got to be enough brains around for a body to be formed that's not on the side of the unions or on the side of the government or even on the side of the rail company.
Or even just make an assessment that we've got as far as we're going to get.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah.
We have to leave it there. I've so enjoyed it, and I hope people at home, I mean, they may agree or disagree with what either or all of us have said, and I hope very much that you will let us know. But, Steve, great to meet you. You're welcome back any time. Thank you very much indeed. Charles, always a pleasure, whether it's the royal family or the state of British industry and the trade union movement. You too are always welcome back. Thank you, gentlemen, very much indeed.